Okay, in this video, we're now looking at multiplying in standard form. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. We'll go through a couple of my turn, your turns, and then there'll be some questions you can try at the end. So the question here says, write 3 times 10 to the power 4 times by 2 times by 10 to the power 3 and write it into standard form. And the way that you do this, we can first of all think about this by kind of getting rid of the brackets, and we can write this as 3 times by 10 to the 4. So just keeping it exactly the same, but just taking out the brackets. And we're timesing this thing here. We're timesing this by 2 times by 10 to the power of 3. Now, a bit like collecting like terms, you've sort of got, well, you've got number parts going on. So you've got a 3 and you've got a timesing by 2 going on. And then you've got a 10 to the power 4 timesing by a 10 to the power 3 going on. Okay, so we're really looking here at like terms. Now, if you think about what is 3 times by 2, it's just equal to 6, and you're timesing that by 10 to the 4 times by 10 cubed, and this is laws of indices, because you're timesing indices with the same base. The base here is 10 and 10, and if you're timesing indices with the same base, you add the powers, so it's going to be times by 10 to the power 4 add 3 is equal to 27, and that is it. Okay, the brackets are just in here just to make things kind of clear to what is going on, but you don't need to write them in. So that is your answer on the first one. But there's a few really important things that you've got to check here, because this one, that is the answer. But double check, is your first number, is this 6 here, is that between 1 and 10? It is, which is good. Are you timesing it by 10? We are. And is the power an integer, a whole number? Yes, it is. So this is fine. If this number here, which is sometimes the case, is not between 1 and 10, you've got to reevaluate a little bit. But this is now in standard form, so that is it for this question. Perfect. So you can try to your turn. You can pause the video, give that one a go, and I will go through this one now. So again, when you first do this, I would just rewrite this without the brackets, just to write it as 2 times by 10 to the power of 5, and we're timesing it by 3 times by 10 to the power of negative 2. And then like before, you've got number parts, so you've got the 2 timesing it by the 3, and you've got the 10 to the 5, you're timesing it by 10 to the negative 2. Okay, so kind of like collecting like terms. We're not collecting them, we're just kind of evaluating them together. So we're doing 2, we're timesing it by 3, 2 by 3 is equal to 6. 10 to the 5 times by 10 to the power of negative 2. Again, you've got the same base, which is 10, which is really good. So you're adding the powers because you're timesing. So what's 5? Add negative 2. It just means 5 take away 2, which is equal to 3. So it's going to be times by 10 to the power of 3. And that is your answer for your turn. Okay, and just double check, is your first number between 1 and 10? Yes, it is. Timesing it by 10 to some positive power or some whole number power, that is fine. That's good. Okay, the second, my turn, is a little bit different, which you're going to see in a second, but you begin by approaching it in the same way. So again, write it without the bracket. So we're doing 5 times by 10 cubed, and then we're timesing it by 3.5 times by 10 to the power of 5. And just like before, if we evaluate our like terms, so you've got a 5, you're timesing it by 3.5, and then you've got a 10 cubed, you're timesing it by 10 to the power of 5. So 5 times by 3.5, okay, don't be put off by that decimal. 5 times 3.5 is just equal to 17.5. Okay, you'll see there's an issue here in a second. And then we're timesing this again by 10 to the power. We're timesing with the same base. We add the powers. 3 add 5 is equal to 8. Now, this here, this isn't wrong. Okay, it means the same thing as the original question, but this is not in standard form, because this number here, it must be between 1 and 10. And 17.5, that is not between 1 and 10. So what you need to go and do here is be a little bit crafty. Okay, how can you get 17.5 to become between 1 and 10? If you go and divide, okay, if we go and divide this 17.5, divide it by 10, okay, well, 17.5 divided by 10 becomes 1.75, which is now between 1 and 10. But just be really, really careful here. To keep this here the same as below, if you divide this number by 10, you've actually got to go and multiply the indice 10 to the power of 8. You've got to times it by 10 to keep it exactly the same thing. Okay, if you times it by 10, okay, you can think of it as 10 to the power of 1. So laws of indices, 10 to the power of 8 times by 10 to the power of 1 becomes 10 to the power of 9. So times it by 10 to the power of 9. And that is your answer. Right, if you're thinking, why have you, because usually if you scale things up, you do the same thing to both sides, right? I always think if you're confused by this, think of a really simple example and it will hopefully make a bit of sense. If we had something like 20 and we times it through by 5, okay, that's equal to 100, which is great. if I then did something like, well, again, let's go and keep this calculation the same, okay, by dividing that 20 by 10. Okay, so 20 divided by 10 is equal to 2. And I go and times that number 5 by the number 10. Okay, my output, so 5 times 10 is equal to 50. Okay, you can see 2 times 50 again is equal to 100. So you get exactly the same thing. So here, to get the same calculation, right, if you do one thing to one number, you've got to do the opposite to the other number to keep your output the same. It's exactly the same thing going on here. 17.5 times by 10 to the power of 8 has exactly the same value as 1.75 times by 10 to the power of 9. You can put it into your calculator and double check. They mean the same thing. You've just got to be careful. If you do one thing to one number, you've got to do the opposite thing to the other index parts. Okay, let's get rid of that. But always a good thing to do if you're kind of confused by why something is in maths, always bring it back to a simpler example and hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. Okay, so the your turn here, you can give that a go, pause the video and I'll go through this one now. Again, let's write it without the bracket, so 2.2 times by 10 to the 4, timesing it by 8 times by 10 squared. Again, that's going to evaluate sort of the similar, the like parts. So we've got a 2.2 timesing that by 8, and then we've got a 10 to the 4, and we're timesing that by 10 squared. Okay, 2.2 times by 8, okay, is equal to 17.6. So we've got 17.6, and we're timesing by 10 to the 4 times by 10 squared. Again, you add the powers, so 10 to the power of 6. Again, this number here is an issue because it's not between 1 and 10, which it needs to be, which is really, really important. So again, to get 17.6 to become a number between 1 and 10, we can go and divide this number by the number 10. So divide that by 10, which means I've got to times this 10 to the 6. I've got to times this one by 10. Okay, which I can write as 10 to the power of 1, just to think of it as in terms of our indices. 17.6 divided by 10 is equal to 1.76, and we're timesing that by 10 to the 6 times by 10 to the 1, add the powers, you get 10 to the power of 7. And again, really importantly, 1.76 times by 10 to the 7 has exactly the same value as this thing above, but just this one is in standard form. Okay, this is in standard form because your first number is between 1 and 10, you're timesing it by 10 to some integer power, whereas this one, this is the issue here with the same thing over here. They've got to be between 1 and 10. That's really, really important. Okay, so now 3 questions. So you can pause the video and then you can fast forward to the end to check your answers, or you can just work through them with me, whatever you need to. Okay, so let's go through them one by one and they increase a little bit in difficulty. So the first one, actually this time I'm not going to rewrite it all out. I'm just going to go and highlight the like terms. We've got a 4, we're timesing it by a 2. We've then got a 10 to the power of 8, and we're timesing it by 10 to the 5, and let's just go and evaluate this. So 4 times by 2 is equal to 8, and then 10 to the 8 times by 10 to the 5 is going to be times by 10. Laws of indices, add the powers, 8 at 5 is equal to 13. Okay, so that one nice and straightforward, hopefully. That is your answer. Good, really good. The second one, okay, again, like terms, we've got a, let's go and do this nicely. So we've got a 5, timesing it by a 4, which you'll see is going to go above 10 in a second. We've then got a 10 to the 5 times by a 10 to the negative 3. Okay, so it's going to evaluate this. 5 times by 4 is equal to 20, and we're timesing that again by 10. 5 add negative 3, or 5 take away 3 is equal to 2. Okay, so 20 times by 10 squared. Is that correct? It isn't, because this number, again, is not between 1 and 10, but it can't actually be equal to 10, but it's not that anyway. So to get 20 to become between 1 and 10, you've got to go and divide that 20 by a 10, which means you times this 10 squared. You times this by 10 to the power of 1, or just 10, they mean the same thing, but we can think about it like this. 20 divided by 10 is equal to 2, and we're timesing that by 10. 10 squared is equal, 10 squared times by 10 to the 1, add the powers, 2 add 1 is equal to 3. So there we go. Again, right, this and this, they have exactly the same value, okay, but this one is in standard form, because your first number between 1 and 10, which is really, really important. Okay, last but not least, same idea again, with just sort of some slightly more awkward numbers, but nothing that we can't handle. So again, go and compare your number parts and then your indice parts, and then we just go from there. So what is 5.8 times by 4? 5.8 times by 4 is equal to 23.2. So we've got 23.2. We're timesing it by 10. We've then got 10 to the minus 4, and we're timesing that by 10 to the minus 7. Indices, you add the powers. So we're doing negative 4, add minus 7. So we're doing negative 4, add minus 7, which you can think about using our hot and cold air stuff as just 4 take away, sorry, minus 4 take away 7, which is equal to minus 11. So just be a little bit careful there. Okay, so this really just means minus 4 take away 7, which is equal to negative 11. But again, is that your answer? It isn't, because this number is not between 1 and 10. So let's go and be a little bit crafty here. Let's go and divide through by 10. And let's go and times this side, again, times this right-hand side by 10 to the 1. 23.2 divided by 10 is 2.32. And we're timesing, just be a little bit careful here. Right, if you're doing negative 11, we're timesing here, so we're adding the powers. Indices, minus 11 add 1 is equal to minus 10, not minus 12. So times by 10 to the power of minus 10. That is your answer, and that is it for this video. Okay, so hopefully that was useful. Again, if you've learned this, that is another thing that you can do in your inventory. So that's just really, really good. Okay, thank you.